1861 and was a major in the 6th Pennsylvania Reserves. So they asked, when they're down in Harrisburg, you know, you get 1,000 soldiers together down in Harrisburg, and they come together, they're going to form a regiment. And when they're ready, which means they've elected their, literally elected their lieutenant colonel or majors and things like that, then they say, okay, we're ready. Well, they didn't have a colonel picked out, but they knew of Henry Medill. So they went to the bosses down there and said, hey, can we pick somebody who's, yeah, it's just, yeah, who do you want? We want Major Medill. I said, okay. He's going to be your colonel. Yep. Then you're ready. And when you're ready, I can just see it now. So here they are. We're ready. And then the officer in charge looks at the clerk and says, what number regiment's next? And the clerk says, 141, sir. And that's how they got their number. It's as simple as that. 5 minutes later, it could have been 142. 5 minutes sooner, it could have been 140. But anyway, Colonel Medill comes over, and by the way, he participated in the First Battle of Bull Run and was distinguished. So he was a brave man in that aspect. But now he comes to the 141st, and he was the perfect man for the job. When I say perfect man for the job, I think we've all seen that situation in life where it's just the right fit. It might have been a teacher you had. It might have been a coach that you had. It might have been a favorite uncle or an aunt. It was just the right fit. So Colonel Medill sees these Bradford County boys and he describes them as being a little rough around the edges. Well, I think we still are. But the point is, he knows that what he's got to do is point them towards the enemy. And if I do that, he said, they'll stick. Battle of Chancellorsville. Well, what happens at the Battle of Chancellorsville during the night, they're surrounded. Sickles' whole corps, the 3rd Corps, surrounded. That's 10,000 men surrounded by the rebels, and boy, they're going to feast on them. The 141st is being shot at from 3 directions, and the Confederates are pressing. And there's Colonel Medill, he's on a horse. Obviously, a pretty good target. And one of the 141st soldiers writes about the fact that he wrote home in a letter, he said, it was amazing to see Colonel Medill with a half a dozen Confederate soldiers running after him, yelling, stop, stop, and shooting their rifles. And Medill just calmly galloped away. After the battle, Medill counted 17 bullet holes in his uniform. So not only was the right fit, sometimes he's one of those people who just like gifted almost. Somebody was watching over him. So we go on to the Battle of Gettysburg. The Battle of Gettysburg, they faced, as I said before, 2,500 Mississippians under General Barksdale, and they're charging across at the Peach Orchard. And Captain Tyler Clark, excuse me, Tyler Lewis, I believe it is, he gets a little nervous about this because he sees, well, we're outnumbered. And he goes to Colonel Medill and he goes, don't you think we ought to get out of here? And Medill just cuts him to the quick. He said, we have orders to retreat. And he did. He stood right there. And his estimation was that he held them up for 20 minutes. If anybody knows about the Battle of Gettysburg, the 1st Minnesota was almost sacrificial lambs. But their sacrificial lamb aspect wouldn't even come into play if the 141st Pennsylvania Volunteers hadn't stopped Barksdale's men for 20 minutes, because the hold on the line could have been breached. Colonel Medill, at the Battle of Chancellorsville, to back up, when his men were losing cohesion, and because they're being shot at from all 3 sides, they don't know which way to face, and they're retreating back, trying to get to safety, and he sees them breaking up. So you know what he does? He grabs the color bearer, stand here, and he starts singing. Boy, you rally around the flag, boy, you rally once again. And they heard it, and they came, and they got organized again. The man had ice water in his veins. He ended up the war not leading the 141st because he had been promoted to brigadier general. And when the war ended, they bumped him up a notch to major general. He might very well be the highest ranking soldier to ever come out of Bradford County. If I'm wrong about that, I apologize to whoever I might offend, but that's Colonel Henry Medill. He was a brave soul. Can you imagine that, 17 bullet holes in your uniform? That's amazing. Then there's another type of break. Again, it goes when you go beyond what's expected of you. I want to tell you about Charlie Norton. Charlie Norton goes to Captain Peck and says, I would like to be your valet. I can cook for you. Well, can you prove it? Charlie Norton whips up a meal. And the captain later on gets sick when Charlie nurses, never leaves his side. And Charlie's such a good cook that all the other captains want to be invited to this captain's tent, you know, underneath his fly because Charlie can cook. One morning, Captain Merker wakes up and he has what they call dainty feet, small, and his boots are missing. And he's mad. He says, I'm going to find those boots. I'll find them. So you can just see him now for a couple of days probably. He's looking at everybody's feet. And then he spies them. And where does he spy them? On Charlie Norton's feet. So what happens? Well, I'm going to bring him to Captain Peck. What's going on here? Your valet is a thief. Maybe the valet stole another stuff. So they take the boots off him and they begin to strip Charlie down. No, Charlie is a female. A female. Charlie's a she. So they cashier him out of the Army immediately because no girls are allowed. But you know what? She's a hero. She went beyond what she had to do. And they asked her later on, why'd you do it? She goes, I felt like I had to do something. And this is the only thing I could do, masquerade. Her real name is lost in time. I don't know. Maybe somebody one day I'll come across it, but I don't know right now. We also have Almiron Cole, one of the Coles from the Macedonia area. Again, if you look at a hero as being someone who goes beyond what's expected of them. Almiron was a sickly individual. He had no business enlisting, but it was written of him that the patriotic thumped in his chest, the patriot in his chest thumped. And therefore, he enlisted with all his, believe it or not, hard to believe, 11 Coles, they got to be related, right? Well, with uncles and cousins and everything else, and even the Captain Cole was his uncle, I believe it was, and he was the captain of that Company C. Go figure. Actually, it was one Cole from Susquehanna County, but he wasn't in that company. He no sooner gets down to Poolesville, Maryland, which is where their first duty station is, because they go from Harrisburg through Baltimore to Washington out to Poolesville, that he's gotten deathly ill now. And they send him home. They discharge him. He comes home on a Saturday, and he dies at home on a Tuesday. The man had no business ever having stepped off, but he couldn't go. So he went beyond himself. He gave his last measure, as Abraham Lincoln said, his last full measure of devotion. But he never fired a gun in anger, nor was he shot at in anger. But you know what? He went over and above what was expected of him. I'd like to read you a poem. Unfortunately, it's written by P.W., and I don't know who P.W. is. Obviously a relative, a friend of his, but never been able to find out who it is. And this is about him. He just came home in time to say, my life is gone, I cannot stay. His bosom heaves his last farewell, no more with earthly friends to dwell. This warning voice addresses all, no matter how or where we fall. These words of truth to each are given. Prepare to meet thy God in heaven. And that's the story of Almiron Cole. Private Alexander Keeney at the Battle of Gettysburg. He's shot in the arm and it spins him around. No sooner is he spun around than he's hit in the waist belt. The waist belt is leather, and it doesn't penetrate his body except to go underneath the skin. With a shattered arm and a bullet in his waist, obviously he's out of action. He manages with a knife, his fingers, I don't know what, perhaps the tip of his bayonet, he digs the bullet out. And now he's recuperating in the hospital. It's done for him. He's not going back to war ever. So you say, okay, you're talking about heroes, how can it be that he's a hero? Because while he's in the hospital, he's suffering from an arm that's broken. It mends, but it's 2 inches shorter for the rest of his life, which is miraculous that they didn't cut it off. And a bullet wound here, and he finds a Confederate drummer boy who's dying, and he tends to this poor young boy until he slips over to the eternal campground on the other side. Again, he went over and above what anyone would expect you to do. He had every right in the world to just say, you know, take care of me, take care of me. But he went above himself and he took care of this little Confederate drummer boy. That to me is a hero. And then we want to give a broader sense of heroes. In 1862, the 141st Pennsylvania was formed, 1,000 men in August of 1862. Prior to the Battle of Gettysburg, that 1,000 men, through death, disease, and being killed or wounded on the battlefield, the number is down to 200. 80% of those men are no longer around to fight at the Battle of Gettysburg. Gilbert Corrin, George Carney, Thomas Lafy are in the hospital at Frederick, Maryland, and the 141st is marching towards Gettysburg. The 3 of them are actually charged with desertion by the doctor because they're going back to the regiment to fight. Well, Colonel Medill got those charges dismissed. But they went to Colonel Medill's, and Gilbert Corrin was the ringleader. And Gilbert Corrin says, we're here to go with you. And Medill says, you guys are supposed to be in the hospital, go back. No, we're not going. And he goes, well, why don't you have any guns for you? Gilbert Corrin, sharp guy, he says, Colonel Medill, this is war. There'll be a gun around soon enough. They marched from Frederick, Maryland to Gettysburg into the Peach Orchard, making up part of the 200 men, and they don't even have guns. But the reality of it is, all these 200 men to me are heroes. If you look at it, they would expect in 80% of them to not make it to this battle. 80%. Because 80% haven't made it this far, and it's only 10.5 months. And 30 men followed Colonel Medill off the battlefield. Knowing what you knew, to not desert, and yes, there were a couple desertions on the march to Gettysburg, but you wonder if they were cowards or just smart, because 80% of you have already died, or now no longer around, just not here. But those other guys stayed, that 200 men stayed. My God, the bravery that was in the souls of all those men, it just astounds me. It really does. I want to take a moment to tell you that in the 5th grade, at Wysox Elementary School, it was over there by the Presbyterian Church in Wysox on Route 187, there's a cemetery out back. And our 5th grade class was at the end of the school, and Mrs. Taylor, God bless her soul, ignited the Civil War fire in my belly. We were discussing the Civil War, and Dale Cobb says, yeah, but Robert E. Lee, and she says, stop that. Because, you know, young men like to be a rebel. And she said, stop that. And well, he stopped, because he didn't mess with Mrs. Taylor. And she pointed out the window, and she said, you have to understand, there are men buried out there who fought in this war. And in that singular moment, I was enthralled with the American Civil War. Because while Oscar Wilde said the beauty of the past is that it is the past, when you're a child, the past really doesn't have any significance to you until it's brought home to you. And it's suddenly out the window. I didn't realize that at the time. I was looking at Colonel Henry Medill's grave. His monument stands right there. You can see it. My eyes were laid upon the 141st Pennsylvania Volunteer Colonel. She lit that fire in my belly. I am going to show you very quickly for the ladies a little fashion show. If you see me dressed like this, should you salute me or not? Because you never salute anybody who's not an officer. And an officer is someone with shoulder boards. So, does anybody know? You look at my pants. You see that stripe down my pants? That means I'm an officer. And if you're you better snap too. And by the way, the salute was like this. But what if I'm sitting down and all I have on is my hat? I'm sitting behind the desk. You see this hat on me. Well, you look right there and there's an embroidered patch and it's got a bugle on it. Well, that means I'm an officer. And you better snap too. By the way, the bugle is the sign of the infantry. Cross swords are obviously the cavalry, cross cannon barrels, the artillery, and if you have a little castle in there, it's the engineering corps. But if I have this on, or I don't have my hat on, and I'm sitting down, and I have this on instead, I'm going to give you a color code explanation as well. This is the frock coat of a captain of the infantry. And you say, okay, you said you were infantry before, how do I know that you're infantry? You look at the shoulder boards, and the background color is blue. If the background color is red, that means I'm in the artillery. If the background color is green, that means I'm in the medical staff. And if it's yellow, gold, the cowards like to say gold, but if it's yellow because they're all cowards, if it's yellow, well, I'm in the cavalry. You can also look at this belt. This is my waist belt. But sometimes there were sergeants who could wear this belt. So you have to also look for some other insignia. And of course, fully dressed, I am now captain of the infantry. 2 bars on the shoulder boards means I'm a captain. And in the reenacting world, well, in my reenacting world, I've been a reenactor for about 20 years. I can portray a private, a corporal, not a sergeant, never was a sergeant, a first lieutenant, a second lieutenant, a captain, and even a colonel. So I can do a little bit of everything. As I close, I'd like to leave you with what I consider an absolutely wonderful story. And it's about Sergeant John Schoonover. I believe this took place at the Battle of Cold Harbor. And I'm not 100% certain, but the story surrounding it seems like Cold Harbor, where they were held in reserve, by the way. And one man was injured with a stray bullet. Well, John Schoonover sat standing beside Captain Kilmer. And suddenly, and they all had these backpacks on because, you know, that's where they carried everything. And all of a sudden, he just goes down like a sack of potatoes. Boom! And Captain Kilmer, oh my God, you know, he's been shot. He's been hit by a piece of shell or something. He's dying. So Captain Kilmer bends down and tries to give him some sucre. And how he does that, he raises him up a little bit and he takes his canteen. And Captain Kilmer's canteen doesn't have water in it. It has whiskey in it. So he gives John Schoonover a drink. John drinks copious amounts, as a matter of fact, but he doesn't rise. And now there's a crowd of 141st Pennsylvania Volunteer soldiers milling around because this is 1864. They've been through things together. Everybody knows everybody, probably, especially Sergeant Schoonover. And by the way, Schoonover, I knew Rex Schoonover. I went to school with him. Rex was a Boomeister, like this. Yeah, he's got this voice. I could just imagine that John Schoonover was the same way, a big guy, you know? So there's this big guy laying on the ground, and he's not stirring. So Captain Kilmer gives him another drink. And oh yeah, he drank some more, he sure did. But he still doesn't get up. And everybody's watching and waiting. And then suddenly, John Schoonover's eyes open up. And you gotta wonder, is he in shock? Is he, looking at the world for his friends for the last time ever? Does he even know where he is? Well, then he gets up. Everybody goes, well, John. And they check him over, they pat him down, and they find out that an artillery shell had struck his backpack, and they basically knocked him senseless for a few moments. And lying on the ground, and they go, John, you're not dead. I could just hear that big brewmaster, "No, but I've had a damn good drink of whiskey." Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've enjoyed this tonight. I certainly always enjoy telling people about the Civil War. Two things here, if you have any ancestors that in the 141st, I'd love for you to be able to write your name down on a pad. If you have any ancestors in the Civil War and you want me to help you try to find some information about them, you can get in touch with me as well, because I like to do that for people. If it's Pennsylvania, good. If it's Bradford County, real good, because they're really easy to come up with. I'd like to just open this up right now. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. If you don't have any questions, well, that means I did a real good job and just told you everything. There's nothing else to tell. What do you think, Arvin? You got a question?
It was very interesting.
Thank you, Arvin. And I do have books to sell here tonight if you want them, and they are $20 a piece. Book, excuse me, signature's $20 a piece. I sign all books. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for coming tonight.